Have you ever watched someone embroidering? Maybe an aunt or grandmother embroidered with bright thread on canvas. The first embroidery samples date back to more than 3000 BCE. And it may be surprising, but embroidery was invented by a man, not a woman. In fact, in ancient cultures all over the world, embroidery was only for chosen and talented boys. These boys were required to study under a master for more than 10 years until they were approved to practice on their own. Today, this very traditional art form is making a comeback, and everyone is invited to try it. This project is a great opportunity to try some basic needle art without having to stitch an entire canvas, because we're going to combine a painting with a stitchery. This is called Aida cloth, and it's often used for cross-stitching or embroidery. But it looks like canvas, doesn't it? Why not paint on it too? This cloth comes by the yard, so I've cut a smaller piece. So think about imagery that could be done in black, white, and gray, and where you might want to add pops of color to accent certain areas. Once you've decided on the imagery you want to use, it's lightly sketched onto the canvas with a pencil. Using a light box or window will allow you to place a drawing under the fabric and see through to trace it. Next, I'll use only black and white acrylic paint on the fabric. These are Blick Studio acrylics. I've got ivory black and titanium white here. Mixing just these two will allow me to create various shades of gray. You might want to start your painting on a scrap of fabric just to see how washy the paint needs to be. If you add a good amount of water, it'll flow pretty easily onto the canvas. Doing a little kind of a desert scene with some cactus. Let's start with my dark black. And it flows on pretty easily. Gonna mix a little white in. Just get some gray for my horizon line back here. And it's easy to just pick up a little water with your brush and move that paint around on the fabric. Once this painting is completely dry, we're going to start adding pops of color. This is a blunt metal needle, and it works great with the open weave of the fabric, and I don't have to worry about pricking my finger. Because of the ample size of the needle, I'm also using one full strand of embroidery floss without having to separate it. Using the whole strand will give me a much brighter color in the finished product. When you're cutting your floss, don't use a piece much more than about 24 inches. So I've knotted one end and threaded the needle. And when you're embroidering, you always want to come up from the back. Some beginning embroidery stitches are called backstitch, satin stitch, split stitch, or French knot. However, there are hundreds of stitches, ranging from very simple, very easy, to more advanced, such as the blanket stitch, the bullion stitch, or the herringbone stitch. I'll show you a very basic stitch called a backstitch that's great for following lines. So I've come up from the back of my canvas, my cloth, and I'm going to go forward about a ½ inch. Pull that through. And next I'm going to come over about a ½ inch away from where I just went down. So the needle's coming up, and then I'm going to go back to where I put the needle down. And that's where we get the back stitch. So you're going to continue to come up about a ½ inch away from that last stitch. This is a great stitch for following lines. You get a nice contour without having any breaks in the thread. If you do need to make a stitch closer to the center of the canvas, you can just kind of bend the fabric over in a soft fold. If you want detailed instructions on how to make a few other basic stitches, you can look at the PDF version of the lesson plan at dickblick.com. Type "Stitch It Up" into the search field. As an option, this project could also be done on a heavy paper, like this watercolor paper. Since paper is more fragile, however, than fabric, you have to think ahead just a little bit. I've done this little drawing of a moth, and we're going to pre-punch the holes by placing this on top of a couple sheets of Wonder Foam. So if I was going to do some stitching here on the wing, I'm just gonna kind of think ahead and imagine the stitches going in this way. You just don't want to punch your holes too close together or you will tear the paper when you're stitching. But for simple stitching, this technique also works just fine. Why not try starting with some easy stitches and see where your journey takes you?